Hey everybody, welcome to the channel. My name is Eric. I'm glad you could join us because we are in the middle of making sausages for Celebrate Sausage Season 2, which premieres October the 1st, and we've got an awesome lineup for you. We are fast approaching the emulsified sausage segment of that series, but my food processor has dull blades. And if you've ever tried to make emulsified sausage in a food processor with dull blades, you'll know it is not a pleasant eating experience. Having sharp tools or a sharp knife is absolutely critical when it comes to processing meat, butchering an animal, working in the kitchen. Matter of fact, I've seen more accidents happen with dull knives than I have with sharp knives. And so in this segment, I'm going to show you how to sharpen just about every tool in your kitchen so that you can have the sharpest knife on the block, guaranteed. Okay, so without further ado, let me show you how we sharpen our Coupe food processor blade. And if you don't have a blade like this, but you happen to have knives that have a relatively large curved belly, or even something like this, these are Taiwanese butchering knives, you can apply the same tricks, the same tips, the same principle to those knives as well. Let's show you how it's done.
All right, this is our Coupe food processor blade, and one of the reasons we bought this model is because you could take that assembly apart and sharpen the blades, which is super important. Let me show you what one of those blades look like once taken apart on a piece of paper. Very, very dull, which will make a mess out of an emulsified sausage. Not even going to try it. This is an incredibly unique blade, and not every type of sharpening system will be able to sharpen it. So let's take a look at the blade. There's my bevel, and I've got a little micro bevel, which is exactly what I'm going to be sharpening. That's going to be the cutting power of this particular blade. When I turn it over, it is perfectly flat. So this is a single bevel blade. And what we're going to do is we're just going to try to find our angle. And the easiest way to do that is to take a permanent marker and run it across that micro bevel. And then we need to figure out how to put it on our sharpening system. So we're going to be using a guided sharpening system by Hapstone. Absolutely great sharpening system. I've had the chance to use this for a while. So what I'm trying to do is figure out exactly how I need to mount this blade so that the edges of the blade form a straight line against those two mounts. I also want the blade to be somewhat centered. This particular setup could work. I mean, this piece and this piece would have to go, and then there's this bit right here we have to contend with. So what I think we're going to do is remove this module. And that's one of the things that I really like about this sharpening system. Depending on the kind of knives that you sharpen, whether they are kitchen knives, which we do a lot of, or EDCs, you can choose the module that works best for you. So in my case, I got the rotating clamp module, which I just took off, and this one, which is the magnetic arm module. And depending on what I'm sharpening, I'll switch between this one or the other one. And as we continue with this series, you'll see how I use each one of those to sharpen different kinds of knives. Okay, so when I put my blade on there, I've got one little screw that seems to be in the way right in the middle. So we're going to go ahead and get rid of that part. And the magnets actually help hold the blade in place. Now, that's going to be especially important in this particular case because there is no handle. So the magnets are going to do a lot of work for us. This is the line that I was talking about. So the tip of my blade is going to form a parallel line to the base itself. And the blade is centered against the entire sharpening system. So there's my center line, and we're just going to adjust that to make sure it's in the right place. Now, every blade is different. This particular video is about how to sharpen this type of blade, but through this series, I'm going to show you how to sharpen your kitchen shears, your extra long carving knives, your butchering knives, all that kind of stuff. And it looks like this blade is in the right position. Let's go ahead and get our stones set up. The stones that we're going to be using are called wet stones. This is actually a silicon carbide stone, and we're going to be starting with the lowest grit. Now, in this case, it's 120. The low grit stones are going to define the edge, and it's typically what you're going to use if your edge is in rough shape. And as you go higher in the progression, you refine the edge. So for this sharpening, we're only going to use 3 stones, 120, 240, and 600, and we're just going to take those and place them in a cup of water for 5 or 10 minutes so that they can absorb some of that water. Wet stones typically perform better when wet, and although many people think they're called wet stones because you have to wet them, the word wet is actually a verb spelt W-H-E-T, which means to sharpen a blade. So let's wet this blade. The first thing we're going to do is take our sharpening stone, and because this has never been sharpened, we're going to start with the lowest grit, 120. Now, this is the coarsest stone that we have in this particular lineup, and I'm just going to load it onto my sharpening arm. Sharpening a blade is all about geometry, and thankfully you don't have to know the Pythagorean theorem in order to sharpen a blade, because a guided sharpening system and an angle cube will do all the work for you. And I just want to say one thing, and I know this is going to be controversial amongst sharpeners, but having a guided sharpening system, which is what we have here, offers one thing that most freehand sharpeners can't achieve, and that is a precise angle. Having a system like this allows you to dial in the angle and maintain it through the entire sharpening session, which is what delivers a razor sharp edge every time. So with that in mind, we need to find the angle at which we're going to sharpen this particular blade, and I don't want to change the angle. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that whetstone and we're just going to very gently drag it over the edge until it completely erases that permanent marker. And this is what we're going to do. All right, so there we go. 1 or 2 passes. And notice that on the lower half of the bevel, that permanent marker has been removed, but on the top half of the bevel, it's still there. So we need to raise our angle just a little bit to completely erase that black mark. And after a couple more passes, there it is. Now let me go ahead and show you what it looks like here. The line is completely removed. This is the angle that it came out of from the factory. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and set that arm so that it maintains that angle. But I also want to know what that angle is so that we can maintain that same angle through this entire sharpening session. So we're going to take our angle cube, place it on the base, zero it out. Then we're going to take our angle cube, place it on the arm, and it's going to give us our angle. So it looks like we have a 27.4 degree angle on this bevel. So we're going to go ahead and just jot that down, and we are ready to begin. With my left hand, I'm going to hold the blade in place. Now, even though the magnets are doing most of the work, I don't want the blade to become repositioned. So I'm just going to hold it in place, and with my right hand, I'm going to use nice, even, slow strokes as I work my way down the blade. The lower grit stones work very fast, especially on this stainless steel, and as your edge is being defined, you're going to notice a very rough edge of metal on the opposite side. That's called a burr, and that's what we're feeling for right here. And our goal is to form a nice, even burr along the entire opposite side of this particular blade. And that lets us know that our bevel has been well defined and we can move on to the next step. Depending on the metal of your knife or your blade, it may take a couple of passes. This particular metal is stainless steel, and this 120 stone is cutting through it like butter. But because it was super dull, we are going to give it a second pass just to make sure that our burr is well defined. And after the second pass, we've got a nice even burr on the opposite side. If you're feeling for it and you notice that one little area needs more attention, you can just work that one area. You don't have to work the entire blade. So now it's time to clean up the burr. So we're going to take our blade and flip it over. Now remember, the opposite side of this blade was flat. We're going to take our whetstone and, keeping it flat, we're just going to drag it across the edge. Now what that's going to do is that's going to flip that burr towards the other side. With my fingers, I'm going to see if that burr has been completely removed, and once it has been, we're going to go ahead and place it back on our sharpening system and change stones. We're moving on to the 240 grit stone, which is still a coarse stone, and this is going to do a great job cleaning up our edge. So once we have our stone on the stone holder, we're going to go ahead and check our angle. Every stone wears a little differently, so we just want to double check that we're at 27.4, and it looks like we're there, so we don't need to adjust. But you can easily adjust your angle. We're now going to repeat the exact same process as we did before. I'm going to run that stone over that edge a couple times until we get a nice even burr, and then I'm going to clean it up by flipping the blade over on the flat side and then using the whetstone to remove the burr. And the motion you should be using is to push your whetstone away from the blade. You're basically just pushing that burr off of the edge, and there you go. Now we feel to make sure it's gone, and time for the next stone. The next and the last stone that we're going to be using for this sharpening is a 600 grit. The 600 grit is considered a medium coarseness. This is going to really do a good job cleaning up the scratch patterns of the stones before it, and it's going to give us a very solid edge for this RoboCoupe. Because of the design of this particular blade and how it's used inside the food processor, there's no need to take this any higher. We don't need to go to a mirror polish. It would just make the edge too fragile. So we're using the fine-tune adjustment to get it to 2740, and once we have it dialed in, we're going to go ahead and lock in that arm and then finish this process up. Just like before, we're going to repeat the exact same process, nice even strokes over the entire length of that edge. And you don't need a lot of pressure. That stone is doing a lot of the work for you. At this point, it's refining the edge. And so when you're finished with your pass, whether you do 1 or 2 passes and you feel for a burr, you're going to notice that that burr is a lot thinner because you're removing less metal and you're really focusing on cleaning up that scratch pattern. And just like before, we're going to take that wet stone, place it flat on the back of this blade, and with very little force, we don't need a lot of pressure when we're removing the burr. We're just going to push that burr off the edge, just like that. Come back a second time, just for good measure, and then we're going to feel for it, just to make sure that it's completely removed. I generally like to do a couple different passes on my final stone. So we're going to put this back onto the table. And with the same stone, that's the 600 grit, we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to do nice even strokes, not a lot of pressure. We're going to flip it. And then we are going to remove the burr. The last thing we're going to do, then this is kind of optional, we're going to strop the edge. That's basically putting a polish on the edge, which is going to take that edge to the next level. Unbelievable. So we're going to dial in our angle using that fine-tune adjustment. We're just going to get it right to where it needs to be. 2740, that's our mark. And if you're going to strop, you're going to do edge trailing strokes, which is what I'm doing here. I'm literally just very gently with only the pressure of the arm pulling towards me. I'm not pushing against the blade because otherwise it would cut that leather hide all up. Once I'm done stropping, I'm going to remove that burr and we're going to repeat this process one more time. Now that we're done, let's take a peek at the blade, and I'm very pleased with the way it came out. Very crisp edge. Nice and smooth. There are no nicks. Now, when we first started, there was a couple little nicks and breaks in the edge just from normal wear and tear, and that's all been fixed. And so it's actually razor sharp at this point. So let me go ahead and just take a piece of paper and do a cut test with it. And the only reason I'm cutting paper with it is I'm feeling the edge to see whether there's any areas that need any extra attention. But this feels amazing. And I do want to mention one last thing. So the other half of this blade assembly is not the same size. It's a little bit smaller, the hole's in a slightly different position, as you can see right here, so it doesn't quite fit the same on the table. So all I'm going to do is just remove that guard, that stabilizer, and it'll fit perfectly, not a problem. Also, because the size is a little different, the angle is going to be a little different. So notice here when I go to remove the marker, I'm removing the top half of the marker on the bevel, not the bottom half. So that means I have to lower the angle just a little bit in order to remove all of that marker. And this is what it's going to look like when we get to the right angle. Notice that all the markers been removed. And just so you know, the angle on this one is 25.75. So we're just going to go ahead and lock it in, sharpen that smaller blade at that new angle. And that's exactly what I did. So now that my Coupe food processor blade is razor sharp, I'm going to go ahead and reassemble it and it'll be ready to use. So let me just show you one last little demonstration with a paper cut test just to show you how sharp it is. This is going to make amazing emulsified sausages. Look at this. Oh, that's nice. All right. Well, thanks for watching this video. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section below. And be sure to stick around for Celebrate Sausage Season 2, premieres October 1st. Click that subscribe button and that notification bell. We post new videos each week. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.